When I say it's a long process, it's a long process. I have one individual client who's a small business owner, and we started planning the exit of his business probably 12 or 13 years ago.
Mhm.
Finally, we got the business sold about 7 years ago. And then finally in 2023, he's now completely out of the business. So it was about a 10-year process from the beginning of thinking about selling to actually doing the deal to actually being able to be out of the business.
Starting your route to retirement.
Welcome to the Guided Retirement Show. I'm your host, Dean Barber, Managing Director for Modern Wealth Management. My guest today is Drew Jones, Certified Financial Planner. Drew has a passion in working with business owners and helping them get their business to be as valuable as it can possibly be, helping them facilitate the exit strategy. So our whole program today is going to be all about what the small business owner needs to do for putting together a proper retirement plan. Please enjoy my conversation with Drew Jones, Certified Financial Planner. All right, Drew Jones, Certified Financial Planner. This is your third time on the Guided Retirement Show. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. Always enjoy it.
So we're going to talk about something that does not necessarily apply to everybody today, but chances are, even if it doesn't apply to everybody, they know somebody who this does apply to. And we're going to talk about retirement planning for the small business owner. And there are a lot of unique challenges that that small business owner has. There's a lot of opportunities that they have. But as a certified financial planner, Drew, do you find it more difficult to plan retirement for a small business owner than you do somebody who is just a W-2 employee?
I would say 100%. Yeah. I mean, because they've got a lot more going on in their life, right? And they're nose to the grindstone and operating, running this business day to day. And so they've got a lot of moving parts to their plan, and we can go into more detail throughout this process, but it's kind of the process to take this company that you've built that could be worth quite a bit of money to help fund your retirement, right? But there's a lot of steps that they need to go through in order to find out what that is worth and how does it work with an overall retirement plan once they decide to sell or, exit the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked with a lot of small business owners over the years, and being a small business owner myself was able to really relate to what they were going through, because you simply get into the mode of focusing on building and growing a company. You focus on saving as much money as you possibly can. There's not really a plan for how much needs to be saved in order for you to retire safely in the future. But I think that a lot of the savings that the small business owners do are, in some cases, more of a protection mechanism for them to make sure that they've got enough cash that in the event that they have a slow business cycle, that they can funnel money back to the business to keep it running. And typically they've got employees that are relying on the viability of the business for their livelihood. And so that small business owner really does come under an awful lot of stress. And once they get that business to where it's running and it's doing well and it's finally profitable, sometimes they can take a step back and start to relax a little bit.
Yeah.
But most small business owners don't have that in them. They keep driving and
Right.
driving and driving. And understanding that that small business owner's largest asset is, in most cases, going to be their small business. But most of them have no idea what that business is really worth, and they have no idea what their exit strategy is. They haven't thought about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you bring up those good points too. And this is what I've seen a lot of times working with small business owners is, and I think you kind of touched on it, that they more than likely will put more money into the business, right? Like, because that's what they know. And as they get that business going, they see the growth. Right. And so sometimes what I will see is people that maybe have neglected outside savings accounts to help offset those times of uncertainty. In a market environment, you're always going to have really good times in a small business, but you're also going to have those dry, lean times. Right. And so it's always kind of planning around that, from a practical standpoint, but also kind of an emotional standpoint. And you being a business owner, you can attest and speak to, kind of the emotion that a small business owner has, right? I mean, this is something that in their eyes, they've either created the business or they helped create it, right?
Right.
And this almost becomes a living child to them,
It
and
is.
they're in it from the very get-go, and they're seeing the good and the bad and all the periods of times of trials and tribulations of raising that child, the business. So when they get to a point of exiting, it can become a very emotional thing for them.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, when you are the business owner and you're one responsible for making all the decisions, I mean, people need you.
Yeah.
And you sell that business and now you're out there. It's like, okay, who am I now?
Who am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. It was a big part of my identity, and so how do I transition though from what I thought my identity was to the core things that are really important to me, in retirement, spending time with people, traveling, doing all those things that the whole sole purpose of creating this business is eventually going to help fund the important things.
Yeah. And so it's I think one of the reasons why I think it's more difficult to do retirement planning for a small business owner, whether they want to sell or not, that's a big question, right?
Right.
Do they want to retain some control? But you look at a lot of small business owners and most of them don't have any kind of business continuity plan put together. In other words, what happens if the business owner dies? What is the continuation plan for the business? How will your spouse and your children and potentially grandchildren, how will they inherit whatever the value of that company is? Did you set up a buy-sell agreement with a key player in the organization that if something happened to that individual, that'd be funded with life insurance to buy the business from the spouse? Because a lot of times, I'll just use me as an example, Drew. So in what was Barber Financial Group and is now Modern Wealth Management, I owned 100% of the stock in Barber Financial Group, which would mean that when I pass away, my wife would then own 100% of the stock in Barber Financial Group. Okay. Well, she doesn't know anything about the business. Yeah. She doesn't want to know anything about the business. She doesn't want to run the business. But had I not set something up, had I passed away, the employees here would have had the responsibility, right?
Absolutely.
They would have had the responsibility of continuing to share all of the profits with my wife. Well, if she's not doing anything, that doesn't make any sense. So years and years ago, we put together a buy-sell agreement, an agreement that says, if I die, you three, there were three at the time, then became four, will buy that business from my wife. And the way that they would come up with the capital is they collectively purchased a life insurance policy on me that would provide them enough cash to pay my wife for the business. That way they get to run the business. They get to then have the ownership of the business split three ways. And my wife just gets the cash and she just goes on her way. A lot of people don't even go to that measure to protect the spouse and to protect the business entity itself.
Yeah, that's exactly, I was in listening to that, you did it the right way, right? But from what I see, or from what you see is most common, is people don't have that foresight, right? That 3 to 5 year window, even longer. A lot of people, that running the business and depending on kind of the setup, either kind of assume that the kids will take over, or they really have no transition plan in place. I mean, if you're thinking about the corporate world, right? If somebody leaves that corporate position, there's usually somebody within the position below them that's going to slide and move right into it. The corporation doesn't miss a beat.
Right.
Small businesses don't have that luxury. And sometimes by not planning, and whenever you do start to feel like, hey, it is time to retire, like if you don't have that plan in place and you're trying to get a valuation and sell that business, it can put you at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that when that small business owner is working and they're building and they're growing, if they want to be out of the business by 65, they need to start the planning process by 55.
Right.
Not at 64.
Yeah.
Right. Because what happens is that most acquirers of a business, a small business, whether it's an internal acquisition or whether it's an external acquisition, most buyers will want that owner to stay in place for anywhere from a 3 to a 7-year period, depending upon the type of business that it is, as that business transitions, so that the business remains viable for whoever acquired. And a lot of times they'll write that in the purchase agreement.
Absolutely.
That person's got to stay. So if you want to, let's say for an example, you want to retire at 65, you need to make sure that that sale of the business is done by 60.
Right.
Because chances are you're going to need to stick around for a few years. Well, if you're going to sell it at 60, you better start planning for the sale at 55.
Yeah.
And you better start getting appraisals, and you need somebody to come in and consult on how do you make the business as valuable as you possibly can. In the industry that you're in, what are the acquisitions that are taking place today look like? What are the acquirers looking for?
Yep.
And how do you make that business more beautiful and pretty and valuable so that you get top dollar when you do sell that at age 60, right? And then by 65, you're free.
Yeah. And I think that's an important aspect too, because I think it helps kind of grease the skids for timing for that business owner too. Depending on the business and who's buying it, some people are going to be turned off if the owner is there 70, 80 hours a week, right? So kind of that time frame that you talked about, you can start to grease the skids, maybe kind of have a reduced schedule, have some people pick up the slack. So it could help with the valuation of that business by having a better appearance of somebody buying this business, knowing that, you know, what the owner did to get there isn't maybe what it's going to have to be, because that owner is kind of slowly taking some steps back.
Yeah. So I think that's a good point. And I think that if you want to get top dollar for your business while you're there, one thing that business owner needs to do is they need to make themselves obsolete in the business. Okay. So in other words,
way to put it.
in other words, before they sell, if the business isn't requiring them to be there every day and the business is thriving without their presence, I don't think most business owners understand, Drew, how much more valuable that makes the business to an acquirer.
Absolutely.
Then you have to ask the question, the person that's going to acquire my business, are they going to be acquiring my business as an investment, or are they going to be acquiring my business as an operator?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what are they going to do?
Right.
Okay. And it depends on the type of business. So the business is more valuable if it can be purchased by an investor and the business continues to throw off profits. You're going to get a lot more. If somebody has to stop what they're doing and come in and they need to be an operator in this new business that you've created, that's going to make that business less valuable.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's important too, to kind of go back to the valuation, right? And you were talking about kind of the timing of that needing to happen. But I think also what's very important is the valuation and having a good dollar amount signed to that sale of that company. I mean, if you talk to a lot of business owners and they were to put a value on their company, it's always, more than likely, not always, but it's always going to be higher than probably what the market value is or what somebody's willing to pay for it. And you can understand why. Again, that analogy of like, you grew this thing,
well,
right?
What happens, Drew, is whatever industry your business is in, you talk with peers.
Yeah.
Right? You watch peers sell a business. And well, how much did you get? Well, I got this. Well, if he got that, then I ought to get that. Right.
Yep.
And yet they don't know anything about the internal workings of the business that was sold in most cases. So they're just using that data to kind of put a number in their mind of what they think that business might be worth.
Then that's a great point. And so I think it's good to have a firm outside of your company, obviously, and there's a lot of companies out there that will do business valuations. But I think that is one key thing as we talk about, you know, business owners transitioning to the retirement phase. And putting together that plan is a whole lot easier if you know exactly kind of what that valuation of that company is going to be. Therefore, what is that? That's going to be the engine that really kind of drives your retirement. You can plan around that all day long on what is important to that business owner as they get into retirement.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Drew, and you and I haven't really talked about your work with business owners, so I'm going to tell a little bit of a kind of stories about what I've dealt with business owners and in getting them from the point at which they're, you know, considering selling to the point at which they actually sell to the point at which they're then retired. And so when I say it's a long process, it's a long process. I have one individual client who's a small business owner, And we started planning the exit of his business probably 12 or 13 years ago. Finally, we got the business sold about 7 years ago. And then finally in 2023, he's now completely out of the business. So it was about a 10-year process from the beginning of thinking about selling to actually doing the deal to actually being able to be out of the business.
Right.
And the way that we did it was we said, okay, let's look at the valuation of the business today. What we think it's worth today. How much do we think we can grow the value of that business over the course of the next 4 or 5 years? And we start putting those numbers into the plan. And each year we're doing an update on that valuation, right? We're projecting X, now it's Y. And as we get closer and finally you can get to that final phase, okay, this is it. And you can build the plan that way. Yeah. But if you're not taking those steps, you're guessing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's good too. Like, you know, if you're talking about the sale of the business, it's the structure of that sale. You know, I mean, is this something that we're obviously going to want to keep track of the value prior to the sale, right? But how is this sale happening? Is it lump sum payout, right? Is it an installment period, right? There's pros and cons to each side, you know, what tax being one of them, but also liability on an installment plan, right? I mean, do you really want to be on the hook for a 3 to a 5 to maybe a 7-year installment plan? Not a lot of people are going to want it, you know? So there's all these things that kind of have to go into, obviously, the sale of the company. But again, how does that benefit you? How does that benefit your retirement plan?
Yeah. So your structure question there is really critical. So a couple of stories. So another client of mine, small business owner, he wanted to sell. And I'm like, okay, we're going to get a valuation. We're going to do all this. He goes, no, I'm selling to my daughter and son-in-law.
Oh.
And I'm like, how do you know what the company's worth? He goes, well, I'm just going to sell it to him for $2 million. And I'm like, where are they going to get the money? He goes, I'm going to carry the note. I'm like, it's a mistake. Don't do this. And I tried to talk him out of it. I tried to talk him into making them go get a small business loan so that he could get the money, protect himself.
Right.
So the agreement was that they were going to pay him in installments over a period of time, and they were supposed to provide, up-to-date financials on a monthly basis, where things are at. Within probably 9 months of the deal being done, they stopped sending him financials. They had the van that he had from the business repoed and stopped making any payments to him. And so now you wind up with father, daughter, and son-in-law battling this out in court,
right?
Which should have never had to happen.
Absolutely.
Now, and that's a nightmare for that guy because he spent his entire life building that business.
All right.
Okay. And now it's nothing.
Right.
Fortunately, he did a good job of saving in other areas, so it's not like he's not able to do what he wants to do in retirement. Another scenario is another friend of mine, this is not a client, but a friend of mine owned a company that did the stand-up concrete walls. So a lot of your big warehouses where you'll see the walls all of a sudden just are there. Well, his company developed the technology to build those stand-up walls, ship them, and then so he sold his business to 3 people that were internal in the business. And he was smart enough to put in the contract that if they defaulted on payments to him, that he would revert back to 100% owner of the business.
Yeah.
So it took about 3 years, and they were running the business into the ground, couldn't make the payments. So he goes back in and takes the business over again, spends about 3 or 4 years, builds it back up, sells it again, but the next time he sold it for cash.
Oh, wow. Okay,
so
moral of the story, good business attorneys are worth their weight of gold.
Yeah. You know, and there's so many ways that a deal could go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And an owner financing is the most dangerous thing that you could possibly do.
Yep.
And a lot of people will go down that path just because they think, well, I'm not going to get us hurt by taxes that way.
Right.
Like, don't let the tax dog wag the tail of your deal, right?
Yep.
I mean, because most business owners only get one chance to exit, and they've got to make sure that it's done right.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, and usually whenever I'm talking with clients that are getting ready to transition from business owner to retirement, I mean, those are the key things that you want to have in place, right? Like you want to have a good financial advisor, but it's just as important as you want a good CPA
And need a good attorney.
and you need a good business attorney, right?
And those people need to all be talking to each other.
Exactly. And what you'll see most of the time though is this business owner, if you think of it as a wheel and all these people are on the outside of that, you usually have the business owner in the middle of that trying to coordinate everything, right? It's good to have it, but all those people need to be communicating on behalf of that business owner.
Yeah, the certified financial planner should really be the catalyst for the communication, because that certified financial planner is going to be the one that, once that exit has taken place, is going to then create the strategy for that individual to be able to have all the income they need for the rest of their life.
Yep.
And there's different tax structures that need to be taken into consideration. So as you start to think about, okay, I want to exit at 65, again, start the plan at 55. And it may seem insane for somebody to think, well, I can't think about that. That's 10 years out. Well, you better. Otherwise, you're going to be working to 75.
Yeah. And I mean, there's nothing worse. And I mean, sometimes you'll see it as, people will be like, hey, I'm here just to learn a little bit more about your business and what you guys do. And by the way, I'm retiring in 2 to 3 weeks, right?
Yeah, no, that's
you should have been here, before
years
ago, before this decision was the date was set, right?
Yeah. And the thing is, in working with small business owners over the years, I've never, ever had somebody say, Dean, we've really started planning for this too soon.
Oh yeah.
That's nobody's ever said that. In fact, it's always been, okay, I should have started this process
Wish I was here
earlier.
sooner.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the moral of the story for the small business owner is, your business is your biggest asset.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know what it's worth. You need to be able to put projections in place for what you think it's going to be worth at the time of the sale. You need to plan on sticking around for a while to make sure that that business remains viable. And if you really want to make that business worth as much as you possibly can, make yourself obsolete in the business.
Absolutely.
I belong to a nationwide CEO group. And so we meet once a month, and then we have a chairman of the group that we meet with individually once a month. And it's all about growing a business, and then it's about exiting the business, creating the value for that business. So a friend of mine started a roofing business, basically out of his garage, just him, starts hiring some people. Now he's got a roofing business that's worth multi-millions of dollars, and the guy's 55 years old. And I happened to go hunting with this guy, and our travel to hunt is quite long. And so I started talking to him a few years ago, and I'm like, look, you are in a scenario here where you don't really ever have to work again, yet you are still putting in like 60 to 80 hours a week, and the business relies on you.
Yeah.
If you want to make your business really valuable, figure out how over the next 4 or 5 years you can actually step away. You know what he's doing? January of next year, he bought himself a place in Florida. He's going to start spending 6 to 8 months a year in Florida, because he finally got the team in place to run the business without him being there on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Now, he's not planning on selling. He's doing an internal sale of about 40% to a couple of his partners, but he's going to remain a majority owner for the foreseeable future. But again, if it hadn't been for a lot of discussion and a lot of planning, that would have never happened the way that it did.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing too. I mean, and then you get those scenarios where it's kind of the best of both worlds, right? Yeah. Like, you don't necessarily need to totally sever from the business that you created, but you can have a reduced, capacity there.
Right.
And still have a good stream of either income in retirement or, keep hopefully building the valuation of that company up every year until you decide that you do want to sell.
There's other components to that sale as well, because you have to ask the question, does the business own real estate?
Right.
Okay, or does the individual, the business owner, do they own the real estate under a separate LLC?
Mm-hmm.
And what will happen when that business is sold? Is the acquirer going to buy the building, or is the owner going to continue to own the LLC that owns the building and continue to charge rent to the new acquirer?
Yeah.
Right. There's just so many nuances that a small business owner has to think about. And if they don't have the right team and they don't start early enough, what's going to happen, what you said very early on in this discussion, is they're going to get caught in a position where their health failed them, something's come up in a family emergency or whatever, and it's going to be a fire sale.
Fire sale. Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody wants that.
No. And those are the things, though. I mean, like whenever I'm meeting with them and you're talking about the structure of the business, that's where I get a lot of interest, in knowing kind of the details of that business, because, I've got a client, for an example, that basically had this situation where they had a warehouse, but they had, the inner workings. They own the company, leases back, the warehouse to that owner. And that's a good stream of income. They've totally stepped away from the business, but yet they're still getting the income from, the rental of this warehouse. So,
and there's a reason to do that.
You've got to understand all the fine details of how this can work out for you to benefit your plan.
There's a reason to do that from a tax perspective as well, because if the owner of that building can continue to get the rent on it, when that owner ultimately passes, the beneficiaries will get a step up in basis.
Yep.
And so that if they want to sell the property at that point, they can with no taxes. But chances are that the individual that owns it has depreciated it down to a point where if you sell it, you've not only got capital gains, you've also got depreciation recapture. So you could lose a lot of money to taxes, and then it might be difficult to replace the same kind of income that you could get by just continuing to rent the building. That's all got to be looked at. And that's why if you think about that business owner, they need the financial planner to start, and then they need the CPA.
Absolutely.
And then they need the attorney for what's the right structure. And all three of those people, they've got to be working together, and you got to get the structure right, and you got to have the tax piece of it right before you ever put your business up for sale.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, it's your biggest asset. You gotta dot those I's, cross those T's, and you've got to have subject matter experts in each of those areas. Right. And you got to have the main person kind of being the quarterback to coordinate everybody and making sure that everybody's doing their role and following through on it. So,
any business owner that has built a business that's going to be valuable understands the value of subject matter experts within their business. They need to understand that the subject matter experts outside the business to facilitate an effective exit are just as important. And those people need to go on the payroll before you're ready to sell.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I tell business owners too. I'm like, again, the kind of that analogy that we make, whenever you were running the business, you had your bookkeeper, you had your business attorney, you had a CPA, a good relationship with them.
You had an attorney,
you might have had an insurance person, you had all the kind of key components. And what we do here and how you approach a plan is the same situation, right? Like you're going to have all those, key people that you had whenever you were growing that business and running it. It's just now they're going to be working, during the sale of that business, but also in the retirement phase of your plan. So,
you're going to need a new set of professionals.
Exactly.
What you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. They're going to be doing the same similar thing. It's just from a different capacity.
Well, Drew, I know that you're passionate about helping small business owners, as am I. It's more complex. Sometimes it's frustrating, but a lot of times it's even more fun than working with the normal executive that's the W-2 that's just going to retire and they got their 401k and maybe a pension or something like that. And it can be exciting. There can be some good tax advantages and good ways to exit. But, a smart business owner is going to start that plan to exit the business 10 years before they want to retire.
Right. Yeah. I think it's always, I think the best part of it too is always seeing the drive and the passion and, the fortitude that person had to go out there and create their own thing. And I think it's even more interesting to learn about their business. And that's what I really enjoy about it is just, working with that person, understanding their story, but also helping relate to, what does that look like for their retirement and kind of married, those two things that were important to them in the past and what's going to be even more important in the future.
Yeah. Well, it's great work that you do, Drew.
Well, thank you.
And thank you for taking time to join me here on the Guided Retirement Show.
Anytime. I always enjoy it.
Hope you enjoyed this conversation with Drew Jones, Certified Financial Planner. If you're a small business owner, you'd like to talk to us about how we would work with you to execute a strategy for an exit, please get in touch with us. We'll be happy to do that. If you know other small business owners who could benefit from the information here on the Guided Retirement Show, make sure and share this episode with them. And everybody, as always, make sure and subscribe and like our program on either YouTube or your favorite podcast app.
Starting your route to retirement.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to leave a comment and share this episode with your friends.
Investment advisory services offered through Modern Wealth Management, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor.